Good evening, Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the next weekly Observation Post Facebook Live report. As usual, I've posted it online and I'm going to just read it off and add some extra stuff to it. Now, I also try to put these on YouTube. Not that I get very many views there, but I figure more than one place shouldn't hurt. Now, without further ado, and I'll try to keep this to about 30 minutes, I plan to review the Organization of Economic OECD, Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, paper for a meeting with the MP staff or the MP, because 48 months long-term disability benefit on average is compared to or versus the service income support insurance plan's 24 months and out the door, kicked to the curb after 24 months. Why should the government treat people less than the average Canadian disabled person? That's ridiculous. Now, we all know, too, one of the main things about this, and I keep repeating this in the hopes that people will start understanding it, is that insurance is for peace of mind, and you're not supposed to lose it on some stupid fucking technicality. So basically, if the risk happens, you're supposed to get that insurance and you're supposed to be able to count on it, not have them cancel it whenever they feel like it. Now, my Canada Pension Plan Disability Approval and my letter from the 26th of July 2013, which is a denial letter for not having 4 out of 6 years for CPP contributions. Now, the thing about that is, the Canada Pension Plan Disability is a very much maligned, abused system. So all of the insurance companies across Canada and workers' comp and pensions screw people over by using the Canada Pension Plan Disability. But in 1966, when they brought this law into place, they said this was going to be help as of right, instead of help as of need. Now, what that means is, instead of having to go and get down on your hands and knees and beg the government for social assistance, welfare, you are supposed to be able to get your Canada Pension Plan Disability when you need it, but by right, because you put away the money and they can't tell you no based on you don't have the need for it. So that's what they meant. Now, the thing is, I applied 3 times for Canada Pension Plan Disability at the behest of the Government of Canada through Manulife and Sun Life. Sun Life mostly, not Manulife at all, actually. So the first time, my doctor didn't send in the paperwork. The second time, the doctor and me sent in the paperwork and they denied me. Then the third time, I sent in both parts from me and the doctor, and they sent me back this letter that said, and I'll read a little bit about it. It says, to qualify, you must be under the age of 65 and meet 2 rules. Number 1, you must have sufficient earnings and contributions to qualify for CPP disability. This means that you must have paid into Canada Pension Plan for at least 4 of the last 6 years, or you have had valid CPP contributions for 25 years, including 3 of the last 6. Or have paid into Canada Pension Plan in each year since the previous CPP disability benefit was cancelled. Now, the second one is the one where they get the subjective. The first one is just factual. Do you have enough contributions? It's either yes or no. You must have a disability that is both severe and prolonged. Severe means that you have a mental or physical disability that regularly stops you from doing any type of work, full-time, part-time, or seasonal, not just the work you usually do. Prolonged means that your disability is likely to be long-term and of indefinite duration, or is likely to result in death. So basically, in a nutshell, CPP disability is an any occupation insurance that you have to be able to do, not be able to do any job that you can do. Now, the thing is that these people have been called out on this in the past about in a court case called Villani, Federal Court of Appeal 2002 or 2003, and they have to use the real-world test. You can't ask a person with grade 5 or 6 education to take a job as a teacher. Well, they don't have the education for it. So you have to look at what is available that you can do that you are qualified for, right? But they act as if you can do any job at all, we aren't going to give you Canada Pension Plan Disability. Fact is, it's better off for people not to get it sometimes because they double dip clawback, say from the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension and SISIP, and then they triple dip people if you have the Veterans Affairs Canada Income Replacement Benefit, so they take the Canada Pension Plan Disability into account at 3 different payments, off 3 different payments. Now, so basically they told me that I didn't have enough contributions. In the last 4 out of 6 years, I didn't meet that qualification. If you don't meet that threshold qualification, then they don't have to assess your prolonged and severe disability because you didn't meet the very black and white 4 out of 6 years minimum contributions. Now that wasn't always the case. It used to be 2 out of 3 years from 1966 until 1998. In a cost-cutting measure in 1998, the Canada Pension Plan changed it to 4 out of 6 years, which is basically a doubling of the vesting period. Because when a person has a pension plan, after so many years, they're locked in. So the old vesting period was 2 years, and you have 1 year to apply after you stopped contributing. But they were running into cost problems, expenses, having to pay out the pension. So they decided to double the vesting period. And then they gave you an extra year to apply, but that's really not that important as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, thing is I should never have gotten it. Now, if I shouldn't have gotten it, then why did I get it? Now, many people will say to me, then what are you complaining about? You got it, and you're saying you shouldn't have got it, but shouldn't you shut up because you got it and you shouldn't have got it? Well, if I hadn't have got it, I'd be better off. Now, how many times can you say that, you're getting this pension that you paid into, you're getting your own money back, and because you're getting your own money back, you're worse off than before? My Sun Life took it into account. My Manulife took it into account. My Reserve Force Pension Plan took it into account. And my Public Service Superannuation Act pension took it into account. 4 different agencies of the government took my Canada Pension Plan into account and reduced their payment and didn't take the other departments into account. That's insane. Now, Veterans Affairs Canada has the powers of an inquiries minister under the Pension Act. It also has the power to ignore the courts. Now, if I'm remembering the number of the law right, it's Pension Act Section 130. As such, the courts or others must adhere to the spirit and intent of the law and not go around the law by asking questions of the veteran. Now, what it says, if I'm remembering the number right, and if I wanted to, I'd look it up and verify it. But basically, it says that if Veterans Affairs Canada gets a court order asking for information about a veteran, unless it's a criminal court or an appeal of a decision by Veterans Affairs, they can piss in the wind. Okay? Now, there aren't many laws that will say the courts don't matter. So that's a very important law. Now, there's another law on the books for Veterans Affairs and another 41 departments that say if they ask for information, they have to get it. The other people that they ask for the information can't say, well, you need a consent form. Or, you're not getting that because we have to protect the person's privacy. Because of these powers that the government gave itself to seek information, instead of asking me, for example, in 2012, they sent me a VAC 928E form, and they wanted my consent to ask the Department of National Defense if I was getting SISIP, because I had told them I wasn't, which was true. Now, They could have used the power in their own act. They could have not bothered me and sent me the form that they didn't need to send. They could have asked for the information that they required, and then they would have called up the Department of National Defense, and then they said, well, this guy told us he's not getting SISIP, but he was medically released. We understand that everybody who's medically released gets SISIP. Is he a lying son of a bitch? They'd say, no, he was a reservist, and we don't pay out SISIP unless you're injured on duty. So they would have found out that there are exceptions to the general rule that you'll get SISIP automatically when you get medically released. Instead of that, they drove me up the fucking wall, because here I was telling the Department of National Defense and Manulife that I should get SISIP automatically because I was medically released. That was the same thing that VAC said. Now, can you imagine how that pissed me off when I find out that the government agreed with me against the government, but it didn't change anything. Now, what I was talking about, the spirit and intent of the law, is that the Privacy Act, for example, it is supposed to collect the minimum amount of information when the government needs information from a person, but it's supposed to collect it directly from the person whenever possible, and it's supposed to collect the minimum amount of information. So, for example, the program arrangement between the Department of National Defense, SISIP Financial Services, and the Department of Veterans Affairs, it states that each organization will continue to collect its own consent forms. Now, if you have this program arrangement in place, the spirit and intent of the Privacy Act is to collect the minimum amount of information, not the maximum amount. Therefore, one consent ought to be enough. In fact, I was having a conversation with a fellow this week, and I'll probably do up a longer column on him and probably do a video about it if he consents, if he gives me permission. And basically, he just got out, and he was a reservist, long-term Class B, and he's going to get about $1,800 a month in a Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension. He's not going to get the Reserve Force pension plan. He's going to get a normal pension plan because he worked so much, served so much in the reserves as a long-term Class B. SISIP is paying him, and they said when his pension kicks in, which is about $1,800 a month, they'll adjust his SISIP. I said, well, you can expect the double-dip clawback. So I contacted his member of parliament yesterday, and I had a chat with them about it, and I'm hoping that they will help get this stuff fixed. Because here's what's going to happen unless some miracle or lightning bolt comes out of the sky and smites them fuckers. SISIP will reduce his payment, even though he paid into that insurance plan for however many years he served. They're going to reduce his payment by $1,800. VAC, since October of 2016, they top up SISIP to 90%. So VAC will ask him, how much do you get if you get a Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension? They're not going to say, does the Department of National Defense insurance take into account, and therefore we won't bother you. He'll end up, more than likely, losing $1,800 at D&D a month on SISIP, and $1,800 a month from the income replacement benefit. He agreed with me that that was fucking stupid. How can you get $1,800 of your own property back? Because that's what the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension is. It's not income, it's property. You put the money away during your career and you get it back after you retire. So you get money that you had put in the bank, and because you have money put in the bank, you lose money off two different insurances. As I explained to the Member of Parliament staffer, I said the Service Income Support Insurance Plan is a traditional insurance because it has premiums, but the income replacement benefit has service instead of cash premiums. Both have value. And in addition, it has the condition that you had to be hurt in service in order to get it. So the program arrangement, which I sent them a copy of, not the full copy, I took a screenshot of it, 12 or 13 screenshots I had there, and I sent them as pictures to them. And I pointed out that the first payer, according to the program arrangement, is the Service Income Support Insurance Plan. Now, one of the things I forgot to put in the email that I sent them was that there is no law on the books in the Veterans Wellbeing Act regulations, citing that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan is a clawback. That's insane. You control the writing of the law. You want to take SISIP into account, but you fail to write out in that law, despite your duty, if you want to take it into account. You didn't put it in the law, and yet you do it anyway. What they did do, to the best of my knowledge, is the only thing they did was they put into force in the 18th of May 2012, they wrote a policy, and they said that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan is a prescribed reduction for earnings loss benefit. I'm sorry, but these people need to be smacked up the side of the fucking head, because a policy is not binding. A law is binding. So they wrote a policy and they act as if the policy is a law, but that's not true. That was their intent. It was in the Canada Gazette in 2006 that they were going to top up SISIP with the earnings loss benefit. So that was their intent, but they didn't write the law to make it so. Now, one of these days, and I explained to the MP staff, where people might go to jail for this, because this could be breach of trust by a public officer. Because the government wrote laws, and I told them about Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, Section 83, and Financial Administration Act, Section 67, both of these federal laws prohibit SISIP and VAC from taking the pension into account. Now, these people, I said to them, listen, have you ever heard of the Partygate mess over in the United Kingdom? I said, Boris Johnson passed a law that said you're supposed to be locked down during coronavirus, COVID, and then they went out and had parties. Now, everybody's going mad about that over there. Now, I only caught a bit of it because I don't give a shit. But they're going mad because the person who made the rules broke the rules they made. Well, I said that's the exact same thing. The government wrote laws to protect people's pensions. It was Financial Administration Act, Section 67, on the general end of the legal spectrum, and it was Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, Section 83, on the specific end of the legal spectrum. Then, because they wanted to save money, they promptly ignored the law they wrote. If we break the law, that's one thing. We didn't write the law. But it's a much worse, it's not nearly as simple. When you write a law yourself, you had the ability to write or not write a law. And then you wrote a law and then you ignored it when it was convenient because you wanted to save money at the expense of the disabled. Nuts. Okay, next one. I'll be here all night. Duplication. Paying twice for the same thing is bad, right? So the Auditor General's file report in 2006, they said that the RCMP were paying twice for the same services, which is a waste of the taxpayers' money, right? It was about the Great West Life long-term disability policy that the RCMP has, which is a copy of, to the best of my knowledge, the Service Income Support Insurance Plan in the late 1970s. Instead of going back and drawing up something from scratch, as I understand it, the Great West Life policy is more or less a copy of SISIP. Okay? That probably explains why the Butte Estate 2012 Federal Court of Appeal case followed up the Manouche case. So they waited to see what the outcome was in the Manouche case, and they used that as a template for the settlement of the RCMP case. So it looks like they lumped the RCMP and the military's cases together. And that backs up what I was saying. I mean, or I'm backing up what they did, or whatever way you want to look at it. So the other one, I put there in my notes, getting a bit dried out here, hold on, was they said in 2012 about the care, mental health was the main thing about the military. They said that there's possible duplication for the Service Income Support Insurance Plan and Veterans Affairs Canada earnings loss benefit. Now, there is no duplication. One is a premium-based long-term disability insurance. The other one, as I explained to the Member of Parliament staff, his name is Clifford Small. He's a Newfoundland Conservative Member of Parliament out in Central. I explained that the Pension Act used to be compensation for military service injury, and the New Ventnors Charter is compensation for an injury in Canada's military service. So one is just the non-indemnity and contributory insurance you bought with your money. The other one is to replace a lawsuit in tort, and it's supposed to make you whole. So these are not in any way, shape, and form the same. They might have designed them to look similar by giving them both a 75% rate of payment. They gave them both 120 days to apply after you get out. So they gave them both 24 months rehabilitation, basically. Now, just because you design something with similar characteristics as another program doesn't mean they're the exact same, because they're not. Okay? They changed the rate to 90% in October 2016. The 120-day thing shouldn't matter, but there was a case, like I was telling someone recently, Jennings, Kenny, K-E-N-N-E-Y, Federal Court 2016 case, and they threw out his case, to the best of my knowledge, because he didn't apply for SISIP within 120 days, which is insane, because you buy the insurance to get peace of mind. You don't need a strict deadline. What about if you're in a coma? You're in a coma, and you can't apply physically, and they would say you can't get your insurance if you came out 121 days later because you didn't apply within 120 days. Go fuck yourself. That's insane. How is that reasonable? Everybody seems to think that insurance is based on legal technicalities, when insurance is a contract of utmost good faith, which means they have to bend over backwards to try to be reasonable. That's what they have to do. Now, on the other hand, you can't withhold information from them because you know your body better than anybody else. So it works both ways. It's not utmost good faith only on their part. It's utmost good faith on your part. That's just the way insurance contracts work. Now, Tom, 2006 to 2012 earnings loss benefit, Rehab, and 2014 earnings while working. Now, I'm talking about Corporal Tom Anderson, retired over in Cape Bray, Newfoundland. Lost 2 legs in Croatia, driving an Iltis, hit 2 stacked anti-tank mines. Now, they cut him off, Manulife, because he had undeclared earnings, they said, from 2014. In 2016, they got a copy of his 2014 tax return. They said, you know, you had $4,200 of income here when he was a stevedore, working for CN, whatever, you know, the cross Canada CN, basically. So they then cut him off for a month. They said, you owe us money and we're going to cut you off. They didn't say it as blunt as I am. I was trying to help him out, and I wrote a story about it. But one of the things that I was thinking about, just on a technicality point, is that I think he was on the earnings loss benefit rehabilitation program with VAC at the time. So SISIP is only supposed to take off half of your earnings when you're in a rehabilitation program. Now, he might not have been in SISIP's rehabilitation program, but he was in a program arrangement partner, their rehabilitation program. Now, I'm just trying to twist their nipples with this kind of point and make them think twice about it, because they shouldn't have done it in the first place. The only money he had coming in on paper was the SISIP payment. He gets the Pension Act pension, and he was part of the class action lawsuit, and it was stated that this was for pain and suffering, and that's not income. So they, because they said he owed money, and they didn't take him to court to prove he owed the money, they simply said, your 2014 tax return shows you had this much income, and therefore we're going to not pay you until we recover the money that you owe us. The heights of bullshit, that is. You have to go to court to prove that somebody owes you money. You just can't say you owe me the money and then collect it. It's nuts. If there's a debt and you go to court and prove it, then it becomes a judgment debt. Before that, it's just an unproven allegation. But that's how they're getting away with this shit, as I explained to Master Corporal or Corporal Bloggins that I was talking to the other day for a while. Because instead of going to court and proving whatever they want in front of a judge where you would have your day in court, they simply use their position and their power and superior knowledge of stuff, and they browbeat us. They basically try to get away with things because we don't know as much of them as them about insurance, which is one of the main reasons that I keep doing this, right? I'm trying to educate people about how insurance is supposed to work. You can't look at what they do and say, Matt, you're wrong, because that's not how it works. What they're supposed to do and what they really do are far apart. Now, I'm getting really dried out here in the throat, so I'll try to keep this short. Last point. Exceptional incapacity allowance versus permanent impairment allowance / career impact allowance / additional pain and suffering compensation, including a review of the inflation awarded. Now, what I'm talking about is that when the Canada Gazette was published in 2006, and they talked about the new permanent impairment allowance, they compared it to the old exceptional incapacity allowance, and they said even after taxes, there's more money in the new award. Now, over the years, they changed the name of the permanent impairment allowance to the career impact allowance, and then they made it to the additional pain and suffering compensation, and by the time they got to the third name, they made it tax-free. Now, not only did they make it tax-free, but they rolled it back to the original award amounts from 2006. So the original awards announced in 2006 were $500 for the lowest grade, $1,000 for the middle grade, and $1,500 a month for the highest grade. It was a lifetime payment, and they made it taxable. Under the 2019 Pension for Life bullshit, they rolled it back to $500, $1,000, and $1,500, which was basically eliminating the inflation adjustments for the intervening 13 years. You're not supposed to screw people over by taking advantage of their lack of knowledge, because they should have just made the whole thing tax-free in 2006, because it's not income, it's compensation for personal injury in military service. And its stated goal at the time was to pay people, compensate them for the loss of seniority, which is movement within a rank, and promotions, movement from one rank to another. Now, if you look at it, the permanent impairment allowance was a good idea. Most workers' compensation and stuff, to the best of my knowledge, do not award anything for lost seniority and lost promotions. And there have been many people that have criticized being stuck at 75% under SISIP and the earnings loss benefit for the rest of your life. Corporal retired Tom Anderson, for example, was only 20-odd, 22, 23, 24 when he lost his legs. Now, instead of having promotion and seniority for a long career, his career got interrupted by the loss of 2 limbs. Why should he have to suffer a cap of 75% of those low earnings? It's nuts. And that's why the permanent impairment allowance is a good idea. The person gets their ELB, SISIP, whatever, and then they get the extra payment for the loss of seniority and promotion. But Veterans Affairs treated it just like the exceptional incapacity allowance. And that was only awarded to people with 98% or higher on the table of disabilities. So if you had 97, too fucking bad, you weren't getting it. So they've made a very high bar for the original exceptional incapacity allowance, which they announced back in 1971 or 1972. So they had this payment that hardly anybody ever got. And they decided to increase the amount of people that were going to get it. But here's the problem with that. Some people thought that they expanded it from 78 to 100 instead of 98 to 100, which would give it to more people, but that wasn't what they announced in the Canada Gazette. In the Canada Gazette, they said that for the first 2 years you're on rehab, you're going to be getting the earnings loss benefit to help you along while you're looking to get retrained and stuff. But after 2 years, you'd have to be totally and permanently incapacitated in order to continue getting the earnings loss benefit until age 65. Now, the permanent impairment allowance was triggered by a thing called totally and permanently incapacitated. So to get the ELB past 2 years, you had to be TPI, and to get the permanent impairment allowance, you had to be TPI. It had nothing to do with the table of disabilities. But don't say that to VAC, because they continued to do it the wrong way. And the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman called them out on it in 2010, then in 2013. They've been called out a bunch of times on this. It came up during a case when I was trying to help a veteran, and I was talking to her recently, which is probably why it's in my head. She called me up and she was wondering about, she's on a sporting team, and she recently found out that someone on the team is a Veterans Affairs Canada employee. She was worried that they were going to find out, the worker from VAC, was going to find out that she was a veteran and then have her cut off like she got cut off in the past. So when she got cut off in the past, they put the wrong date on the letter. They said, we're going to cut you off as of May the 30th, 2017, and they meant the 30th of May, 2016. Now, you make that kind of mistake on official correspondence, you're stuck with the mistake that you made. You can't change it. You could have been competent, and you could have put the right date on it, but you didn't. So she hired a lawyer, took it to court, and Admiral Dan Murphy was her lawyer, and they won, okay? Now, when I was discussing this at length with the Admiral, I said to him that, she's been on ELB for X number of years, and therefore she should be considered totally and permanently incapacitated. And therefore, she's supposed to be not in rehab, which was the reason that she got kicked off. They said that after she had a motorcycle accident, she hurt her knee. So they said she couldn't participate in rehabilitation, so they kicked her off of rehabilitation. But that's the kind of stuff, if you really want to play that game, they should have adjusted her rehabilitation because her new injury affected it. But I was telling the Admiral, I said, listen, she shouldn't be in rehab. Because after 2 years, you're supposed to get it as compensation for your loss of earnings. That's what they said in the Canada Gazette back in 2006. So she should have been getting the earnings loss benefit, but not had been in rehab. So I said, listen, are you still in rehab? No, she said, I got declared DEC. I said, when? 2018. I said, really? You were DEC many years ago, because you can only be in rehab when you're not DEC/TPI, totally and permanently incapacitated. But that was what the Admiral found really interesting, because he was saying, so you're telling me that, you can only be in ELB for 2 years, and after that you had to be TPI, which means you're DEC, and therefore you shouldn't be in rehab, and you should be actually getting an extra payment a month, the permanent impairment allowance. So she never got declared DEC until 2018, which meant that they saved money for all of those years. I'd have to look up the exact details, but she was TPI a lot more earlier than 2018. So they saved money at our expense. That's one of the biggest things that I said to the newest guy I was talking to, which is only the last couple of years I was trying to help him. And basically I said, look, excuse me if it sounds like I'm backtracking on my words. If you think of the government as your employer, the government has an insurance policy, the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, that is not really Manulife. It's the government. The government's insurance that they hired Manulife to administer. Now, you become disabled in the service. You get your Service Income Support Insurance Plan, and you're getting long-term disability from the employer, not Manulife, and you bought it from the government. Now, you put away money into your Canadian Forces pension. So your employer put away money for you and banked it for you. Now, when you get out, they want to reduce your long-term disability payment. It's not Manulife who saves. It's the government, the former employer, who saves, and that's conflict of interest. And then you have the income replacement benefit, I told them, because that is another form of insurance by the government. So the government finds out that he gets Canadian Forces pension, which is property, and then they want to take it into account to save money on a different government department's expenses. So the former employer saves money on the long-term disability plan first, then they save money on the income replacement benefit second, and if he ever applies for and gets approved for the Canada Pension Plan, they'll want to save again on the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act because of bridging. This shit has to stop. And what has to stop is the robbery, the theft. Why should we subsidize our former employer by having our payments reduced? Because I had to explain clawbacks to him because he didn't get it. I mean, he wasn't getting clawbacks before, and he's only just getting started on this system of after you retire. So I explained to him that they don't take the money, they take the money into account, and they reduce the payment of the Service Income Support Insurance Plan. And Veterans Affairs, they reduce their payment of the income replacement benefit. Now, I said these people ought to be talking to each other because they have what's called a program arrangement in place, and any common sense, any reasonable-minded person would look at this back in 2006 when they set up this program arrangement, and they ought to have taken into account things that they both wanted to take into account to save money. This is absolutely absurd what they're doing because they failed due diligence, the duty of care. There's a duty of care not to treat you unfairly, but they collect information and they breach the Privacy Act twice. They might need the information once, but they don't need the information twice. So the thing is that when they get the information for the second time, they ought to be able to try to coordinate. But what I told them was don't think for a second that, like Master Warrant Officer Dan Mansfield, that for him they fixed it a bit and he got the Canada Pension Plan, and for the sake of argument, say it's $1,000. They arranged it so that he didn't lose more than $1,000. Now that sounds reasonable compared to what they're doing already, where they're taking it into account 2 or 3 times. But I said, don't forget, they're both breaking the statutory law. They're both breaking Financial Administration Act, Section 67, Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, Section 83, and the common law to boot. Because you're not supposed to take the injured person's property, insurance, personal savings into account to reduce the damages for the person who injured you. That's the thing that's called the Bradburn Rule that I've been going on and on about it for the past 7 or 8, 9 years. They aren't supposed to reduce your damages, your compensation for injury, because you have money in the bank. Think about it. That's not fair, is it? If the person who injured you got to save because you had money in the bank, then they aren't going to get, air quotes, punished for doing what they did to you. A person who injures you has to make you whole after they injure you because they should have left you alone. Now, looking at the time, my eyes are getting a bit blurry and my throat's a bit dry, so have a good weekend. I'm actually thinking about doubling up my time because I'm looking at my draft ideas and I don't think I'm covering them fast enough. I'm getting behind, so I might do a Tuesday night too and try to double up, or just a special one every now and then or something like that. So hopefully one of these days you'll see that shit's getting to hit the fan and they're going to get caught, because that's what needs to happen. Have a good weekend.